Good afternoon. My name is Matt Wilson. I'm a reporter with AIM Media. I'm here today with L.J. Francis. He's a candidate running for the State Board of Education. He's running as a Republican against Victor Pettis, who's running as a Democrat. This is part of a series of conversations being put on in partnership between AIM Media, Futuro RGV, the League of Women Voters, and the McAllen Citizens League. Interviews will be posted on social media by Futuro RGV and The Monitor. Mr. Francis, how in the world are you?
Doing great, Matt.
Glad to hear it. Did you drive in just now?
Yes, I did.
From Corpus, right?
Corpus Christi.
Awesome.
Yes, sir.
So let's start off with a little bit about you. Why don't you just tell me who you are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you and your sponsors for hosting this event. Big thanks to Miss Kinnerk, who was organizing so tirelessly behind the scenes. Well, one thing I want voters to know is the thing about me is I'm from Jamaica and I immigrated here, and since I got here, education has been a really big part of who I am. My mother was an educator for 35 years. I went into the family business at a young age. My granddad had a construction business and my dad had a restaurant business. And so I was used to working hard and then obviously going on to further education. I became a civil engineer, licensed professional engineer here in the state of Texas. Very active in my community, working on my PhD in environmental engineering right now. And just have seen the need when I was teaching a physics class as part of the requirements for the PhD of what students did not know, and I decided to continue with some more research. I worked on a grant with some fellow teachers in the Coastal Bend, and we begin to see just certain breaks. And the reason why I'm here today is just to talk about my experience and also what I've been seeing in Texas education.
Awesome. You've talked some about your experience. Tell me what qualifies you to serve on the Sboee.
So the State Board of Education is 15 members for the state of Texas. And one very important thing is this board needs someone who is able to build bridges, be able to work well with others. I've led several boards, currently chairman for our local regional flood planning board and several other state and local boards. So I definitely have the board experience and the leadership experience at the executive level. I have a passion for education. My family has been in education. My mom was a teacher. Other family members were teachers. I was teaching while I was working on my PhD, and I have done the research. I have spent countless hours. I started my campaign about a year and a half ago, and one very important thing that I'm proud of and your viewers can be proud of is that I took the time to listen on my various listening tours, and I believe that I am on the right side of the issues that parents care about, issues that will seek to improve student outcomes in our school in District 2. And I just have a passion for winning. My aim is to make sure that District 2 and the schools in District 2 are all A-rated and, be number one.
I think that the State Board of Education is likely one of the less well understood branches, or I suppose boards. Tell people what they actually do. What role does it serve?
A very good question, and this is something I've practiced quite some time because, as you said, the State Board of Education is not well known. It's a board made up of 15 members. They're elected on a partisan basis to the state. Each district is different geographically. Currently, it has about 1.8 to 1.9 million persons in each district. And most importantly is the State Board of Education sets the standards for K through 12 education in the state of Texas. And that ultimately becomes the backbone on which educators and practitioners build curriculum from. Another important thing about the State Board of Education is that we manage currently a $56 billion education endowment fund. called the Permanent School Fund, which very important to Texas and Texans, actually. It goes as far back as the Texas Constitution. And so the board members have a fiduciary responsibility as well.
Sure.
The State Board of Education also charters schools, so they provide the last approval for the opening of a new charter school. And the board also provides last opinion on State Board of Education certification, so what teachers should know and continue to know in their continuing education as they develop their craft.
Let's get into some issues. What would you say District 2's biggest asset is, and what would you say its biggest challenge is?
Matt, I think that in District 2, and for those who are not familiar with the district, so it starts in Hidalgo County, so about the McAllen area, and it goes all along the Gulf of Mexico coast, right up to Matagorda, Wharton County. So we have 14 counties in District 2. So geographically, it's very it's large, but the people, I would say, Matt, they're very family oriented. I believe right now, other than persons in the district, because obviously they're our biggest asset. I love South Texas. I love the Valley. I just love this area. It reminds me so much of Jamaica. And what we see here is we're seeing a record number of job creation in the state of Texas, and especially in District 2. When you look at the Corpus Christi metro area, which now is deepening and widening their channel, we're going to be able to see an increase in growth for jobs and job availability. So that's bringing new industry in that region. And also, when you look down here in the Rio Grande Valley, I'm just so pleased to say that there are several partnerships with education and workforce. There are a lot of companies moving into Texas, and I believe one of the biggest assets is our infrastructure, and there's the possibility for students to earn more, because that's important too. Having the education and the skill set and the technical competencies that are necessary to fill these jobs, Matt. One thing that I would say is an area of concern for me is it's in the classroom. It's the level of rigor that students are exposed to. Actually, I was at the, and gave testimony at the Texas State House of Representatives recently in July of this year, 2022. And one thing that Commissioner Marath was saying is that there are a number of schools that are not buying textbooks that are approved from the State Board of Education list. And Matt, that's something that is very concerning, not only because there's no oversight and there's no accountability from the board to parents and our citizens, but we're actually seeing where when schools are not purchasing these books, the rigor is down, students are not able to do well on the STAR test, and students they're not on a level playing field, and the whole point of the STAR test, this standardized test, is to create a standard by which we feel Texas students should know and would prepare them for success after 12th grade.
Yeah, I want to talk about the STAR test. It's gotten lots of criticism in recent years. Where do you stand on it? I mean, some people have talked about abolishing it. Do you think it needs to be around? Do you think it needs to be improved?
I definitely know the impact of a high-stakes test. I personally am not a real good test taker. Actually, the high-stakes tests in America when I came was very different than what I was used to, say, in Jamaica. We didn't have multiple choice back then. So where I stand, I know that there needs to be a standard. There needs to be something that we could hold our teachers accountable for, our educators, our principals, and be able to give students and parents a chance to know on a across-the-board basis what students will know, what they should know when they leave high school. So I think there needs to be a standard. Do I think it's the best right now? I would say, Matt, that there needs to be some improvement. I am encouraged by STAR redesign that's happening right now, but also that has its growing pains too, because what they'll do is the STAR test will be different. It will have different options for answering questions. Instead of all multiple choices, there could be, a match. It's going to be on the computer instead of paper and pencil. So I think sometimes when you want change, we need to do that incrementally. But I do believe that a standard is necessary. We need to ensure that the standard reflects what Texas students should know and will prepare them for success after 12th grade. And right now, I do believe that there needs to be some improvement to that. I've heard from several parents where there's just, you could go and review past tests. Some of the questions are not even geared towards what, the average person in the world of work ever uses anyway. And that becomes a point of contention for students because they're learning something that does not really apply to them. And so we need to be able to have some control over the test questions themselves as well.
Is it fair to say you support significant changes to it?
I support significant change. That's fair, Matt.
Cool. Let me switch gears a little bit, talk about school safety. School safety is probably the #1 issue since the Robb Elementary School shooting in May. It's on everybody's mind. I know locally we've had lots of threats to local schools and arrests based on those threats. What do you think needs to happen to make Texas schools safe?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I applaud the governor and his team for tasking the TEA with that special school safety personnel that would report directly to Commissioner Marath. So that is one big step. In terms of bringing everything in terms of school safety under one umbrella, I think that's important to centralize these efforts as, we have over 1,000 multiple ISDs in state of Texas, so a little over 1,000, and everywhere is different. Every area is different, and as you know, everything in Texas is bigger, and there are more nuances to that. So that was a good first step. The other thing that we need to do, being an engineer, I would say we need to make sure that we're building schools that are physically hardened. For example, ensuring that there's the one point of entry and exit, be able to control and then be able to have eyes if you can't have physical control on certain areas that we know from past experiences are targets for persons who are not coming to do well on campus or coming to kill our kids, and parents are just terrified of that. So I think this is important because we need to ensure that parents are comfortable sending their kids to school. One parent told me, she's like, I'm not even worried about the type of education that they're getting right now. I'm thinking, is my child going to be safe at school? And that's something that no parent should be thinking about. The other thing that I think that would be important is that training, Matt, and State Board of Education has done in the past trainings for school board members. They've worked with the Texas School Safety Board on that initiative. And I think that we just need some practical, common sense initiatives from what we've learned in the past, implement those best practices into our schools. And I think the position I just mentioned at a TEA would be a good home for that to roll out so that it becomes a standard in the state of Texas. Everyone in Texas can be assured that any school they send their child to, it will be safe.
You mentioned design, making schools harder targets. I know in the Rio Grande Valley we have some fairly impoverished communities, and lots of our schools don't have money to redesign schools for education, much less to make them, sort of strongholds. How should they pay for it? What can the state do to help them?
Well, definitely, I believe that safety is a priority for the governor. I also know that in the past there has been funds directed to school districts for safety. Do I believe there needs to be more? Yes, quite frankly, I think that we have missed the mark when it comes to putting funds for school safety. You know, we were a bit reactionary in this initiative. I think that, you know, working with the governor and his team, and even federally, I would be an advocate for getting money into schools that can't afford it, schools that need the help to make sure that they have the at least minimum standard that will prevent disaster from happening in schools.
Let me stick with money. You know, long-term, talk to Region 1 down here, and they say long-term trends indicate that Valley schools are going to continue to struggle with enrollment going down. We've seen I think a post-pandemic correction with better enrollment numbers, but long-term it's probably not a pretty picture. It comes along with school closures potentially, you know, just not a school district kind of going in on itself. What do you see on that front, and what can the state do to help districts that might be experiencing an enrollment decline?
So that's a very nuanced question. It's actually a complex question that, you know, has no simple answer. But some of the things that I'm thinking about, one, we know that COVID-19 was a big disruptor for schools and families. There are a set of parents that believe that, you know, they want to homeschool their child now. They may have, because of a job change or a job setting scenario, they're working from home. They could provide that level of supervision. And also, because of school safety, again, they feel more comfortable having the kids at home, and they may be able to be working from home and provide that care as well. So that's one thing that's happening. The other thing is, you know, the pandemic caused a lot of learning loss, and we're still, I mean, the commissioner indicated with some recent numbers that has started to improve. In some cases have gotten much better than was expected, so that's good. But the real issue is, I think parents, at least the parents that I've talked to, and I've talked to thousands of parents in the 1.5 years, they don't feel like sometimes when they send their students to school that it's a partnership. And I know I've talked to teachers as well that that relationship is not as it should. And I think that, you know, we need to hit the pause. Whenever there's a concern and a critique is bring forward, I think in my experience, schools sort of close in and they shut down in terms of information flow. In order to get over this hump, as I would call it, and this is a very small hump, I think, you know, transparency in what goes on in schools. Parents don't know a lot of things. And as a stakeholder, I think that parents and administrators should be working more in tandem. This is an issue that can be solved together. But I do feel that being leaders and leaders in education, the administration needs to set the tone for the community, be more transparent as much as they can. And I think that parents will start to regain trust in our public school. I think that parents would start to send their kids back to public school again in more, and not have this concern where they think that their students are not going to be safe, one, and the concern that their children are not being taught the necessary skills that they need to be successful.
I want to stick on that topic, transparency. Would you support or oppose legislation to require charter schools to have an elected board like a public school? So
I don't think that kind of bears on transparency, because right now charter schools, they are subject to the same laws as public schools. I mean, charter schools are public schools, just to be clear.
Sure.
At this point, I would not support that legislation. And the thing about the charter schools, it's a different, the reason why charter schools was started here in 1995 in the state of Texas is to provide a different approach to public schools. And research has shown that when you have at least 25% of charter schools in the area, that the public school also does well, because the charter school is able to focus more on a specific type of student. They could provide a little bit more focused education based on what their charter is, and there are several different types of charters. But I think it's a misnomer that charter schools are somewhat evasive and they're not forthcoming, or there's a lack of transparency there. If you're a charter school parent or member of the community, you have, through Texas public law, the right to request documents. Sometimes we've seen some of the most egregious issues of lack of transparency from elected members who believe that they're not accountable to parents and the community.
I want to stay on this topic and ask another question. A state law passed in 2015 requires public entities and schools report all contracts that must be approved by a governing board or that are worth more than $1 million. However, the Texas AG's office ruled that a charter school is not a public entity and therefore does not have to report such contracts. Would you support or oppose legislation that would include charter schools in the definition of public entity in that respect? Why or why not?
That's an interesting question. As I understood that discussion to be, the public entity clause there talks about the fact that public schools receive, let me just be clear. Let's start saying local school boards, so ISDs versus charter schools, because they're both public schools. So ISDs receive money from their community, and so that brings us a different level of scrutiny that I'm sure no one would agree with, that should happen. Charter schools, on the other hand, they receive state money. And again, any books, any information that needs to be had can be requested from the charter school. They have to give it to the parents and stakeholders that are responsible. So I think the avenues for getting information is there already, in my opinion. I think that we don't need to be creating new laws if we're not trying to solve an issue. I don't see this as an issue that's of concern to me at this time.
Sure. Let me switch gears back to finances, because I've got an interesting question. I cover education for our paper, and I've seen several school districts express a desire for the state. Well, currently the state funds them based on average daily attendance rather than enrollment. I've seen several trustees and superintendents say that if they switch to enrollment versus ADA, the school would get more money. Would you advocate for a switch like that? Do you have any opinions on it?
I have not thought too much about this topic, but what I will say is from my conversations, right now the formula, as you correctly said uses the ADA, average daily attendance. Right. What this provides from my research and my conversation is accountability for each child, making sure that the child is there, they're learning, there is a certain number of days that is necessary for instruction. If you're going to give it well and students are going to learn, the child needs to be there, learning, participating. So this provides some more accountability for schools. I think the enrollment was a kind of reflex. Some trustees wanted that because, yes, once the child is enrolled, if the child leaves, they still keep the money. But this is not being accountable to our citizens. This in some cases may work well for districts that are suffering. But I think we need to really look at it at a broader level, because sometimes when we rush to decisions like these, it creates an inequity in the system where people have the ability to kind of game the system, and we want to ensure that our children are first. Our children are being educated, and by using the ADA method, unless we can definitely deliberate about how to make some changes in the formula. But I think the ADA method is a good proxy right now just to ensure that students are receiving at least the minimum instruction time in the classroom.
Sure, if I'm understanding it right, you're saying it's an accountability measure.
Yes.
Keeps kids in classroom.
Keeps kids in classroom, that's correct.
Awesome. Let's talk about teachers. Educators are leaving the field at an alarming rate. The governor has established a teacher vacancy task force. I don't think their first report is scheduled till March. What would you attribute teacher shortages to, and if you're elected, how would you address them? Another big question.
Yes, Matt, that's true. Well, first of all, I'd like to say to teachers, happy World Teachers Day. Today is World Teachers Day, so I'd like to acknowledge that. And as I mentioned before, my mom was a teacher for 35 years, and I have taught as well. And I've talked to teachers in the district, and one big thing keeps coming. And if you go back and watch my testimony at the Texas House of Representatives, the Public Education Committee hearing, I testified that we're looking at rigor and a problem with discipline as two separate issues. But it's a combined issue, because right now teachers are not able to discipline students in the classroom. And if you don't have discipline, you can't have rigor, because you're not able to set a standard for how students behave, how they should learn, and it just becomes a very disruptive classroom. Many teachers have said that they feel like glorified babysitters, because, I mean, what's a parent if you can't discipline the child, if you can't steer them in the right direction? So that's a big factor. Teachers believe that they're not able to control the classroom in terms of discipline, and there are certain students that they can't get removed because of one thing or the other, that it becomes a big distraction for them, and it's just not a good environment for them professionally.
What sort of additional disciplinary measures do you think teachers need at their disposal?
Well, I mean, simple stuff as when they send a child to the administration sends the child right back in the classroom. So there needs to be more of working with teachers from administrator to teacher level. I think that, some administrators believe that if you're an excellent teacher, you'll find a way to deal with the problem. And in some cases, that is true. But the fact remains that when there is no standard of what is a behavior in class like, and there's no support from administration, teachers feel like they bear the brunt of both teaching the material, developing the curriculum, and having to discipline in an environment that doesn't even support discipline. So I just mean that they don't have the ability to set a standard that is supported by administration as well.
I guess what could the State Board of Education functionally, what could it do to institute that?
So, Our form of how we operate in the state of Texas is a bottom-up approach where, we like and we've seen that it brings a very different ingenuity when you have local school boards develop methods that work for their community. So, I don't want to be bold enough to say that I have the perfect answer that will fit every single ISD or public school. But one thing that we could have discussions about is what is proper behavior in the classroom, and just to advocate to school board members that it all relates to student outcomes. If there is not an environment that's conducive to learning, then all your goals are not going to be as high or as best as they can be. So I think that message just needs to be shared first. with school boards, and then we'll see what happens then.
Folks, again, this is part of a series. These conversations will be posted on the Monitor social media as well as Futuro RGB. LJ, thank you.
Thanks so much.